The desert was quiet that morning, the kind of silence that pressed against the chest and made a man's heartbeat sound too loud. The sun had just started to rise, painting the sand in gold and blood-red tones. A vulture circled overhead as if it already knew what was about to happen. Bound between two wooden poles, a man knelt shirtless, bruised. His arms stretched until the ropes cut into his skin. His long, dark hair was tangled with dust, and his breathing came in sharp, broken gasps. He had the look of someone who had seen war, who had killed and bled and carried the memories like scars under his skin. But now, as the wind swept through the barren valley, he looked defeated. The woman standing a few feet away was trembling, not from fear but from the weight of the choice before her. Her belly was swollen beneath her worn dress, a quiet reminder that new life was waiting within her, even as death begged to take one in front of her. She held a rusty revolver in her shaking hands, the same one she had taken from her husband's saddlebag the night he rode away and never returned. Her pale hair clung to her face and her eyes clear. Uncertain shifted between the dying warrior and the endless horizon. "Please, kill me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The words came from deep inside, not from pain, but from something worse, shame. The kind a man feels when he's lost everything that made him who he was. The kind that makes dying seem like mercy. She didn't move. The wind carried the faint rattle of the rope, the soft whinny of her horse tied nearby. Every sound seemed louder out here in the emptiness. She had been riding for 2 days across that cruel land, searching for safety, for water, for a sign that God had not abandoned her. Instead, she found him half dead, staked to the ground by men who once called themselves soldiers of justice. The man had no name to her. Only a legend whispered among settlers, a warrior who fought for his people, accused of massacres, hunted like a beast. The army called him the ghost of Red Canyon. The tribes called him the last of the fireborn. And now, here he was, broken and left for the buzzards. She had thought about walking away. She even turned her horse once, ready to leave him to the desert's mercy. But something made her stop. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, not as an enemy, not even as a savior, but as someone who might understand what it meant to lose everything. She knew that look. She had seen it in her own reflection when her husband's grave was still fresh and the nights seemed endless. "I can't," she said finally, her voice unsteady. "I can't do that." His head tilted, confusion flickering through the pain. "Then you condemn us both," he muttered. "You, me, and every soul who crosses your path after this." Her hands tightened around the gun. "You think I haven't condemned enough already?" She whispered, her eyes wet, but her voice growing steadier. A storm was coming. She could feel it in the air, the desert wind picking up, hot and dry. It carried the scent of something distant. Maybe smoke, maybe war. She had heard stories that fighting had spread again between settlers and the tribes. Out here, far from the towns, no law protected anyone. Just men with grudges and women praying for miracles. When she cut him down, his body fell into the sand like a felled tree. He didn't thank her, didn't curse her, just lay there, breathing raggedly, watching her with the sharp eyes of a man who had forgotten how to trust. She offered him water, the last she had. He drank slowly, and for a moment, the world seemed still again. But the peace didn't last. From the ridge to the east, distant riders appeared, tiny figures growing larger with every passing heartbeat. She saw the glint of metal, heard the faint echo of shouts. They were coming fast. "Your people?" she asked, panic rising in her voice. He shook his head. "No, yours." The words struck her harder than the wind that swept across the desert. Her people. The men who had killed her husband. The same men who had staked this warrior to die. The same who would kill her for helping him. He tried to stand, his muscles trembling from weakness. "You should go," he said, wincing as he steadied himself against one of the poles. "They'll show no mercy, neither would she." "I won't leave you," she said, surprising even herself. "Not again." He stared at her, a long moment passing between them, something fierce and wordless. Then the sound of hooves shattered it. Dust rose in the distance like a storm. She could see their faces now, the men who had once sworn to protect the frontier. Their eyes were wild, their uniforms dirty with the blood of too many wars. The warrior reached for the broken rope still tied to his wrist and wrapped it around his palm like a weapon. "You should have killed me," he said again, not in anger but in resignation. She stepped closer, her revolver still clutched in her hand. "And leave my child to grow up in a world that does this?" she said quietly. No. For a heartbeat, the wind stopped. Even the desert seemed to hold its breath. Then the riders shouted. Gunfire cracked across the sand. The horse behind her reared, neighing in terror. The warrior pushed her down, taking the first bullet in his shoulder, gritting his teeth as he fell beside her. The sand exploded around them in waves of fire and smoke. When it was over, the air smelled of gunpowder and iron. The woman crawled toward him, her face streaked with blood and dust. His eyes were open, but the light inside them was fading fast. "Why didn't you run?" he asked, his voice thin. "Because I'm tired of running," she answered. Her hands pressed against his wound, her tears mixing with the dust. "You said I condemned us all." "Maybe I did. But maybe it's time someone stopped hiding." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried both pain and peace. "You're too late," he said. Then, in the distance, came another sound different this time. A horn. The rider's signal. More were coming. Many more. She looked toward the horizon where the sun burned low and red, the land trembling with the approach of vengeance. The warrior tried to rise again, his strength nearly gone. "If you want to save your child," he whispered, "you'll have to fight like the ones who tried to destroy me." Her hand trembled on the revolver. "Then teach me." But before he could answer, a new echo broke through the air, a sound of hundreds of hooves, thundering closer. The horizon darkened. She turned toward him, her heart pounding, her unborn child kicking beneath her ribs. "What have I done?" she whispered, and as the first line of riders crested the ridge, the wind carried the warrior's last words, soft, haunting, almost lost to the desert. "You refused death," he said. "Now you've called it upon us all." The sky turned the color of flame as the massacre began to descend. The smoke lingered long after the shooting stopped. The air was thick, heavy with dust, and the bitter scent of gunpowder. The woman crouched behind a half-buried wagon, clutching her stomach, her breath short and uneven. Her ears rang from the thunder of rifles, and though the desert had fallen silent again, she could still hear the echo of screams carried away by the wind. The warrior lay a few feet from her, his chest rising and falling weakly. Blood darkened the sand beneath him. Every time she looked at him, she felt the same question clawing inside her: why? Hadn't she left when she could? Hours passed before the wind began to clear the haze. The riders had moved on, chasing what they thought was victory. They had burned what was left of their victims and taken the horses. But they hadn't found her, not yet. She waited until the sun dipped low, then crawled toward the man who had once begged her to end his life. His eyes opened at the sound of her movement. For a moment he looked ready to fight again, but then he saw her face and relaxed. "You're still alive," he murmured. "So are you," she said. Her voice cracked from thirst. He tried to smile but winced instead. "That makes one of us lucky." She tore a strip from her dress and pressed it against his shoulder. He didn't flinch. She'd seen wounds before her husband, had been a soldier during the border wars, but she'd never seen anyone this calm while bleeding. His skin was burned from the sun, his wrists raw from the ropes, yet there was something unbroken in him. He had the look of a man who had lived through too much to fear dying. When night came, she built a small fire using dry sagebrush. The desert grew cold fast, and the fire was their only comfort. They sat in silence for a long time, listening to the crackle of flames and the faraway howl of coyotes. She thought of her home, of the small cabin beside the cottonwood trees, the smell of bread baking, and the sound of her husband's boots on the porch. That life felt like it belonged to another woman now, someone softer, someone who hadn't learned how quickly the world could turn cruel. "Why did they do that to you?" she finally asked. He stared into the fire. "Because I didn't die when they told me to." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of something deeper. He told her he had been captured after a raid near the river. The soldiers accused him of killing settlers, women and children among them. He swore he hadn't, that it was revenge for what had been done to his own people. But the truth didn't matter anymore. They needed a face for their anger, and his became the one they chose to hang in the desert as a warning. They said my people were savages, he said quietly. But it was their fire that burned our homes. Their bullets that took our children. She didn't know what to say. She had heard the stories the ones told in town, where every attack was blamed on the tribes, and every killing by soldiers was called justice. But hearing him now, seeing the pain behind his calm eyes, she began to wonder how many of those stories had been lies. What about you? He asked after a while. You don't look like a woman who belongs out here alone. I was trying to reach the fort, she said. There was supposed to be safety there. Food. A doctor. My husband. He used to serve under the captain there. But the soldiers came before I reached it. Her voice faltered. They thought I was hiding one of your kind. Maybe they were right. He looked at her belly, then back into her eyes. Your husband, he was one of them. She nodded slowly. He believed in the law, in duty. He died believing it meant something. But the men who wear his uniform now, they're not the same. The warrior leaned back, closing his eyes as if trying to forget the sight of those men. The firelight cast long shadows across his face, tracing the scars that told more truth than any words. When the fire burned low, she found herself studying him. His body was strong despite the wounds, his skin marked by the sun and years of battle. Yet beneath the roughness there was something gentle in how he spoke, how he watched her with steady, patient eyes. He didn't pity her. He didn't question her presence. He simply existed beside her, bound by the same fate the desert had given them. By dawn, they were already on the move again. The warrior could barely walk, but he refused to rest. If they find us here, they'll finish what they started, he said. She helped him onto the horse, steadying his weight while trying not to stumble under it. The horizon stretched endlessly ahead, golden dunes, dry shrubs, the ghost of mountains far in the distance. As they rode, he told her about his people, how the war had driven them from their valleys, how children were taken to missions to be taught to be civilized, and how his own brother had died chained to a wagon. His voice didn't carry hatred. It carried grief, quiet, deep, and tired. She told him about the baby growing inside her, about the fear of bringing a child into a world that seemed to devour innocence. I thought if I could reach the fort, maybe there'd be a doctor, maybe someone who could help, she said softly. Help, he repeated as if tasting the word. Help is just another kind of promise. It breaks the same. The sun grew harsher by midday, and every step of the horse seemed heavier. They stopped near a line of rocks where a spring trickled faintly. She helped him drink, then filled her small flask. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It felt like they were bound by something invisible, pain, maybe, or survival. When she looked up, she noticed smoke rising from the west. They're burning something, she said. He followed her gaze. His jaw tightened. They're burning the land. It's how they drive us out. She felt a chill, despite the heat. You mean they're coming this way? He nodded slowly. They'll find us by nightfall. The panic returned. She could hear the faint thump of her heartbeat, the tremor in her hands. But then he reached out, placing his rough palm over hers. His touch was steady, grounding. If they catch us, you'll tell them I forced you, he said. That I took you hostage? I won't, she said. You will. That's how you live. I won't lie, she insisted. Not again. He studied her face, searching for something, maybe fear, maybe defiance. What he found instead was a woman who had already lost too much to be afraid. They continued until the sun began to set, the desert glowing like molten gold. The horse stumbled from exhaustion, and they stopped near the ruins of an old trading post. The walls were broken, the roof half collapsed, but it was shelter. She helped him inside, spread her blanket on the dirt floor, and built a small fire. As the night deepened, the sound of distant drums echoed faintly across the valley. The warrior's expression darkened. They've begun the retaliation, he said. For every one they kill, 10 will rise. You mean, no one is safe now? Not them, not us. She stared into the flames, her hand resting protectively over her belly. The child moved again, a faint flutter that reminded her life still existed in this wasteland. She whispered a quiet prayer, not knowing if anyone was listening. The warrior lay back against the wall, his voice softer now. When I was a boy, my mother told me that the land remembers everything. Every drop of blood, every broken promise. It never forgets. One day, it will take back what was stolen. She looked at him, his face half lit by firelight. And what happens to people like us? He met her gaze. We get caught in between. The night wind moaned through the cracks in the walls, carrying the scent of smoke and something else, fear or maybe destiny. She knew the coming dawn would bring more than just light. It would bring choices neither of them could escape. He turned his head toward her, his voice barely a whisper. You still could have left me. You still could have given up, she said. Outside, the desert stretched on endlessly, its silence heavy with what was yet to come. Somewhere in that emptiness, a new storm was rising, one that would decide whether they lived long enough to see the world they both no longer believed in. The fire flickered low. She closed her eyes for a moment, resting her head against the wall. The warrior's breathing slowed beside her, but she could tell he wasn't asleep. Neither of them was. Far away, the drums grew louder, and with them came the faint rhythm of hooves. The massacre hadn't ended, had only begun. The dawn came slow and red, spreading across the desert like blood over sand. The woman woke to the sound of distant thunder, though the sky was clear. It wasn't the storm she feared. It was hooves. The rhythm of horses carried far in the open land, steady and growing stronger. She rose quietly, brushing the dust from her dress, her hand instinctively resting on her belly as the unborn child shifted inside her. The warrior was already awake, sitting against the cracked wall of the trading post. His wounds had stiffened overnight, but his eyes were sharp. He didn't need to ask what she'd heard. He already knew. They're searching for us, he said, his voice low. They'll sweep through every ruin, every canyon, until they find what they're looking for. She glanced toward the horizon, where faint plumes of smoke curled into the morning air. You mean you, she said. He didn't answer right away. Me or anyone who reminds them of what they've done. There was bitterness in his tone, but beneath it lay something else, a quiet weariness. The sound of a man who had fought too long to remember why. She felt it too. That endless exhaustion of running from one kind of pain into another. They packed what little they had, the flask, the small blanket, a piece of dried meat from her saddlebag. The horse limped as they led it through the cracked ground. The warrior walked beside it, his stride unsteady but proud, as if refusing to let weakness claim him. The woman followed close, her heart tightening each time she saw the dark stains spreading through his bandage. By midday, they reached the edge of a dried riverbed. There were tracks, their wagon wheels, boot prints, and horseshoes. She knelt to study them, her breath catching. They're not far, she whispered. He crouched beside her, tracing one of the marks with his finger. 2 days old, he said. Maybe less. They're heading north. To the fort? She asked. He nodded. That's where they'll regroup, and that's where they'll bring the fire next. She hesitated. You think they'll burn it? They'll call it a defense. But yes, her heart sank. The fort had been her last hope, the place she dreamed of reaching when everything else fell apart. If that hope burned, what would be left? She looked at the warrior, at his expressionless face turned toward the sun. Then what are we supposed to do? He looked back at her, his voice steady but heavy. We survive. That's all the desert ever asks. They followed the riverbed until the light began to fade. The sky turned copper, then violet, and the cold wind swept through the valley. They found shelter beneath a small overhang of rocks. The woman lit a small fire while the warrior gathered what dry brush he could find. For a while, they didn't speak. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of everything they couldn't say aloud. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. You said once your people called you the Fireborn. What does that mean? He stared into the flames for a long time before answering. It means I was born during the night our village burned. My mother said I came into this world between ashes and smoke. They believed it made me marked by both worlds, the living and the dead. She watched his face in the firelight, the flicker of orange tracing the lines of pain and strength that shaped him. "Do you believe that?" she asked. He didn't look away from the flames. "I used to. Now I think maybe it was just a story to make sense of what can't be understood." She nodded slowly. "Like how people tell stories about heaven to explain loss." He glanced at her then, his gaze lingering on her belly. "Do you tell those stories to your child?" "Every night," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Even if it can't hear me yet. I tell it that there's still kindness in the world, that someday it'll find it." He said nothing, but something softened in his eyes. The woman didn't notice. She had turned her face to the fire, lost in thought. Later that night, as the wind grew colder, a shadow moved along the rocks. The warrior noticed it first. He stood quietly, his hand reaching for the knife at his belt. The woman froze when she saw the change in his stance. From the darkness, two figures emerged, riders, dressed in worn leather rifles slung across their backs. Their faces were tired, not cruel, but wary. "Don't move," one of them said. "We've been tracking smoke." The warrior stayed still, his eyes fixed on the man's rifle. The woman stepped forward, raising her hands. "We're not here to fight," she said. "We just needed shelter for the night." The older rider squinted at her. "You alone?" She hesitated. "Just us." The man's gaze shifted to the warrior, and his jaw tightened. "That one's not supposed to be breathing. There's a bounty on his head." The warrior didn't flinch. "Then take it," he said flatly. The younger rider's grip tightened on his rifle, but the older one hesitated. Something in the woman's expression stopped him, the dirt on her face, the exhaustion in her eyes, the way her hands trembled protectively near her belly. "You've got a child coming," the man said slowly. "You don't need this trouble." She looked at him with quiet desperation. "Maybe I don't, but I can't leave him to die." The man sighed, lowering his weapon slightly. "You don't know what you're doing, lady. The army won't forgive this. They'll hang anyone who helps them." "I know," she said, "but I've already lost everything they could take." The two riders exchanged a look. Then the older one muttered something under his breath and turned away. "You never saw us," he said, "and we never saw you." They disappeared into the night, leaving only dust in their wake. When they were gone, the woman sank beside the fire, her whole body shaking. The warrior looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "You risked your life again," he said quietly. "Why?" She looked up, her eyes glistening. "Because every time I look at you, I see the same thing I saw the day my husband was taken. A man who didn't deserve it." He turned away, his jaw tightening. "You don't know what I deserve? Then tell me," she said. The silence that followed was long and heavy. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "I led the raid on the settlement by the river. It wasn't supposed to end in blood. We went for food, for water, but someone fired first. I lost half my men before I could stop it." He paused, his eyes distant. "They said I killed their children. Maybe I did. I can't remember anymore." The woman's throat tightened. "And you think that's reason enough to die?" "I think it's reason enough to stop running," he said. Neither spoke again that night. The fire burned low, the stars stretched endless above them, and the desert whispered around their fragile shelter. By the next morning, the horizon was alive with movement, black dots spreading across the valley like ants. The soldiers were back, and this time, they weren't just searching. They were marching. Smoke rose from behind them where villages once stood. The warrior's face darkened when he saw it. "They're burning everything," he said. "They're not hunting me anymore. They're cleansing the land." Her heart thudded. "Then what do we do?" He turned to her, his gaze hard but calm. "We go south, into the canyons. They won't follow there." She mounted the horse, helping him climb behind her. As they rode, the land changed rockier, harsher, the wind sharper against their faces. But behind them, the world burned brighter. At one point, she looked back and saw riders breaking off from the column, chasing the trail of dust they'd left behind. Her pulse quickened. "They've seen us." The warrior's hand gripped her shoulder. "Keep riding." They raced through narrow gullies and over ridges until their horse stumbled and nearly fell. She dismounted, helping the animal back to its feet, her legs shaking from exhaustion. The warrior pointed ahead, toward a narrow canyon hidden between two cliffs. "There," he said. "That's where we make our stand." The woman stared at him, terrified. "You mean fight?" He nodded slowly. "Fight or die running." As the sun began to set behind the cliffs, their shadows stretched long and cold across the stone. She could hear the distant echo of hooves once more, closing in. Her hands tightened around the revolver. The child inside her kicked, as if sensing the storm ahead. The warrior looked at her one last time, his eyes unreadable. "You still could have ended this, back in the desert," he said. She met his gaze, her voice trembling but sure. "Maybe I wasn't meant to." The wind rose again, carrying the smell of smoke and steel. Somewhere beyond the canyon's mouth, the soldiers rode closer. The earth seemed to tremble under their approach. The woman stood her ground beside the warrior, her heart torn between fear and defiance. As the desert prepared to witness yet another act of its endless vengeance, the canyon swallowed the last of the sunlight as they reached its heart. The walls rose high on both sides, streaked with red and gold, like ancient scars left by the earth itself. The woman stopped the horse and listened. The desert behind them had gone quiet, too quiet. Only the wind hissed through the rocks, whispering warnings neither of them wanted to hear. The warrior slid down first, his movements slow but steady despite the wound reopening on his shoulder. Blood soaked through the bandage again, but he didn't seem to notice. He was staring at the narrow entrance they had just passed through, his eyes fixed on the faint dust still hanging in the air. "They've followed," he said softly. "They're not far." The woman looked back. The light was fading fast, and the canyon mouth was already turning dark. She couldn't see anyone yet, but she could feel it, the low vibration of hooves traveling through the ground. Her stomach tightened. She clutched her revolver, her hands trembling. The warrior noticed but didn't say anything. Instead, he began gathering stones, stacking them quietly into a makeshift wall near the base of the cliff. "What are you doing?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Buying us time," her voice cracked. "You think we can fight them all?" "No," he said, "but we can make them pay to reach us." The words sent a chill through her even in the growing heat of the canyon. The thought of killing, of fighting again, twisted her chest. She wasn't a soldier. She was just a woman trying to survive, carrying a life she hadn't even met yet. But now survival meant becoming something else, something harder. As darkness settled, the warrior handed her a small knife. "If they take me," he said, "you run. Follow the creek bed south until you see the white cliffs. There's a hidden pass there." She stared at him, shaking her head. "I won't leave you." "You will," he said firmly, "for the child's sake." The way he said it silenced her. It wasn't a plea. It was a command born of someone who had already accepted his own fate. She turned away, blinking back the heat in her eyes. They waited in silence, the night pressing heavy around them. Somewhere far off an owl cried, and came the echo of voices shouting, laughing, closer now. She could hear the metallic clatter of rifles and the restless snort of horses. The sound of pursuit. The warrior crouched behind the rocks, his knife ready. "They'll send a scout first," he murmured. "Out. Don't fire until you have to." She crouched beside him, her pulse hammering in her ears. Every breath burned her throat. The minutes dragged, stretching like a rope pulled too tight. Then, she saw a shadow moving near the canyon entrance, the glint of a rifle barrel catching moonlight. Another figure followed, 2, maybe 3 men. Their voices carried, low, but clear enough. "Tracks lead here," one of them said. "They couldn't via gone far." The warrior's grip tightened on his knife. His breathing slowed, eyes fixed on the first man stepping over the rocks. The woman tried to steady her aim, but her hands were slick with sweat. The second man moved closer, scanning the shadows. Her heart pounded so loud she was sure they would hear it. Then, without warning, the warrior moved. His knife flashed, silent and quick, and one of the men fell before he could cry out. The second spun, firing blindly into the dark. The shot echoed through the canyon, and the woman ducked as stone shards flew from the wall behind her. The warrior lunged again, grabbing the rifle from the man's hands, and striking him across the face. The sound of the blow was sickening, and the soldier dropped. For a few seconds, it was only silence again, broken by the warrior's ragged breathing. He turned to her. "Now they'll know," he said. "Be ready." She didn't ask what he meant. The answer came soon enough. From outside the canyon, a horn sounded one long, piercing note that echoed through the cliffs like a cry for vengeance. Then the thunder began. Dozens of hooves, pounding the earth, drawing closer. The woman pressed, her back against the rocks, gripping the revolver with both hands. She could see the fear in the warrior's eyes now. Not for himself, but for her. "When I tell you, get behind me," he said. The first wave came fast, 3 riders rushing into the canyon mouth, their rifles flashing in the dark. The warrior grabbed one of the fallen men's guns and fired. The report echoed like thunder, and one of the riders fell hard, his horse screaming as it tumbled. Another fired back, hitting the rocks just above their heads. The woman ducked and felt grit rain down her neck. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out. "Stay low," he shouted, returning fire. The gun kicked against his shoulder, reopening his wound, but he didn't stop. Another rider dropped, then another. The third retreated, shouting orders to the men behind him. The canyon went silent for a moment. The woman tried to catch her breath, her heart beating so fast she thought it might burst. She glanced at the warrior. Blood streamed down his arm, and his face was pale, but his eyes were alive, burning with something fierce. "They'll circle around," he said. "Try to trap us." "Can we escape?" she asked. He looked toward the narrow pass on the far side of the canyon. "Maybe, but not together." She shook her head, tears forming again. "Don't you dare say that." He gave a small, grim smile. "You're stronger than you think." The next wave came louder, faster this time on foot. The soldiers advanced between the rocks, firing in bursts. Bullets sparked against the stone, one striking close enough to tear through the woman's sleeve. She gasped, dropping to her knees. The warrior pulled her back, shielding her with his body as dust and gunfire filled the air. For a moment, everything became a blur of noise and smoke. She could barely see, barely breathe. Then, through the haze, she caught sight of one of the men sneaking along the ridge above them. He aimed his rifle straight at the warrior's back. Without thinking, she lifted her revolver and fired. And the sound split the air. The man fell, rolling down the slope, his rifle clattering beside him. The warrior turned, stunned. "You saved my life," he said. She reloaded with shaking hands. "Then you owe me one." A faint, grim smile flickered across his face. "I'll pay it soon." But before she could answer, a blast from a rifle struck the rock beside her. The concussion knocked her backward, and her head hit the ground. The world spun, her vision blurring. She could hear voices shouting, the warrior's voice among them, deep and furious, and she blinked the dust from her eyes. She saw him fighting hand to hand now, his knife flashing. His movements desperate but precise. He was outnumbered, surrounded, but he didn't fall. The woman crawled toward him, trying to reach the revolver that had fallen from her grasp. Her ears rang, her body screamed for rest, but she kept moving. She saw one of the soldiers raise his rifle behind the warrior. She grabbed a stone and hurled it, struck the man's arm, and the shot went wide. The warrior spun, driving his knife into the attacker's chest. They fought like that, together wordlessly, until the last of the soldiers retreated toward the canyon mouth. The ground was scattered with rifles and bodies. Smoke hung in the air like a ghost. The woman leaned against the rocks, her chest heaving, her hair matted with dust and sweat. "They'll come again," she whispered. He nodded. "They'll bring more." She looked toward the far ridge where the moonlight touched the rocks. "We can still reach the pass," she said. "If we move now." He didn't answer right away. His gaze was fixed on something in the distance, the faint glow of fire beyond the canyon spreading across the plains. The soldiers weren't just hunting them anymore. They were burning everything. "They're cleansing the land," he said softly. "And we're standing in the middle of it." She followed his gaze. The fire reflected in her eyes. "Then we keep going," she said, "until there's nothing left to burn." The warrior looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing the strength that had been growing inside her since the desert. "You'll make it," he said quietly. "The child too, and you." she asked. He turned away, tightening his grip on the blood-stained rifle. The fireborn don't run from flame. Before she could speak again, the echo of drums returned deep, rhythmic, growing closer. The canyon walls seemed to pulse with their sound. The soldiers weren't the only ones coming. The tribes were rising too, drawn by vengeance, by loss, by the same fire that had consumed everything. The woman stared at the warrior, realization dawning in her eyes. They're coming for them, she said, and they'll find us first. He nodded once. Then the desert will choose who it keeps. The wind howled through the canyon, scattering ashes and sand as the first flicker of firelight appeared on the horizon. Both sides were closing in, and there was no longer any path left untouched by death. The woman reached for his hand, her breath trembling. Whatever happens, she said, don't let them take me alive. He looked at her, his expression unreadable, his hand tightening around hers. I already promised, he said quietly. The drums grew louder. The fire crept closer, and above them, the canyon walls began to glow with the reflection of war that had finally found them both. The drums kept echoing through the canyon like a heartbeat that wouldn't stop. Smoke rolled over the cliffs, and the horizon glowed red from the fires spreading across the plains. The woman stood beside the warrior, gripping his arm for balance as the wind whipped around them. The air was heavy with heat and dust, and the scent of burning wood mixed with gunpowder and ash. Every sound felt sharper now, the hiss of the wind, the creak of their horse shifting its weight, the faint cries in the distance. The warrior watched the canyon mouth with steady eyes, though his hands trembled slightly on the rifle. The wound on his shoulder had darkened, his strength fading. Yet he stood tall, as if he was part of the stone itself. They're coming from both sides, he said quietly. The soldiers and my people. Neither will stop. The woman swallowed hard, her throat dry. Then we'll be caught in between, he nodded. That's the price of living between two worlds. She looked at him, realizing that the line between right and wrong had vanished long ago. Both sides had spilled too much blood to remember mercy. The warrior wasn't their enemy. He was just a man trying to hold on to what little was left of his people. And she was a woman who had already lost everything except the fragile heartbeat inside her. As the first flashes of light reached the canyon walls, the warrior turned to her. Take the horse, he said. Ride south through the pass before they reach the mouth. No, she said, her voice breaking. You can't stay here alone. He gave a faint smile. This is where I end it. Where they all end it. She stepped closer, shaking her head. If you die here, they'll call it another massacre. They'll say the savages struck again. No one will know what really happened. His eyes softened. Then tell them. Tell your child. The silence that followed was heavy and endless. Then, from the far side of the canyon, came the cry of war horns high, sharp, wild. The tribes had arrived, their shadows moving like ghosts through the smoke. From behind, the soldiers' bugles answered. The world seemed to collapse between two forces of fire and vengeance. The warrior grabbed her hand and pulled her behind the rocks. Go now, he urged, but she didn't move. Instead, she raised her revolver and looked toward the canyon entrance, where the first figures appeared through the smoke. If I run, she said, her voice trembling but fierce, they'll still find us. My child deserves better than running. Stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. Then we fight until there's nothing left to fight for. The first shots rang out, bouncing off the canyon walls. The sound was deafening. The woman fired once, hitting a soldier in the leg. The warrior returned fire, his movements fast and sure despite the pain. The tribe's arrows cut through the air from the opposite ridge, striking the ground near the soldiers. The canyon became chaosman, shouting in two languages. The clash of bullets and blades echoing in the narrow space. The woman reloaded with trembling hands, her ears ringing. The warrior shouted something to her, pointing toward the side path that led up the rocks. She nodded and began to climb, clutching the revolver as she moved. When she looked back, he was still standing in the open, his rifle raised, firing toward both sides, keeping them from reaching her. He was fighting everyone, not for victory, but to end the cycle that had swallowed them all. She reached the top of the ridge, gasping for breath. From there she could see everything, the flames spreading through the canyon mouth, the dust rising, the men falling one by one. The sky was red as if the desert itself was bleeding. Her heart twisted when she saw the warrior stumble, drop to one knee, and then rise again. He refused to fall. Then she saw the soldiers breaking through from the west, the tribes charging from the east. They collided in a roar of violence. She screamed his name, but the sound was lost in the storm. The horse below neighed wildly, pulling against its reins. Terrified by the fire and noise, she slid down the rocks, landing hard near the base where the horse was tied. She untied it and tried to climb into the saddle, but something inside her shifted the sharp pain that took her breath away. She froze, clutching her belly. The child. It was time. The realization hit her harder than the battle itself. The contractions came fast, and she fell to her knees, the world spinning around her. The warrior saw her and ran toward her, stumbling, blood streaking down his side. He dropped beside her, his face pale, his hands trembling as he took hers. "Breathe," he said softly. "Just breathe." She tried. Through the screams and gunfire, through the chaos, she focused on his voice. He stayed beside her, his hands steady, his words calm. "You're strong," he said, "stronger than any of them." The battle raged on around them, but for a few moments it felt distant, as if the canyon itself was protecting them. She cried out, clutching his hand tighter. Then, beneath the burning sky, a new sound joined the noise, a cry that wasn't of pain or war, but of life. The baby's cry cut through the chaos like a prayer breaking through smoke. The warrior looked at her, something like peace flickering in his eyes. He tore a strip from his shirt and wrapped the child carefully, his blood mixing with hers. "A child born in fire," he whispered. "The land remembers everything. Maybe this time it will remember hope." She was too weak to speak, but her tears said everything. She looked at the child, small and perfect, and then at him. "You saved us," she whispered. He shook his head. "You saved me." But the moment didn't last. The soldiers' shouts grew closer again. The warrior rose, lifting his rifle one last time. "Take the child," he said. "Go south. Don't stop until you find the White Cliffs." She tried to grab his arm. "No, stay with us." He smiled faintly. "Someone has to keep the fire from spreading." Then he turned and walked toward the canyon mouth. His steps were slow but sure, his silhouette framed against the flames. She watched him disappear into the smoke, the sound of gunfire following. Her heart ached, but she knew he was doing what he was born for, protecting. Even as the world around him burned, she wrapped the baby close to her chest and climbed onto the horse. The animal hesitated, snorting at the smell of smoke, but she whispered softly until it began to move. Every muscle in her body screamed with pain, but she rode on, guided by the faint moonlight above the cliffs. Behind her, the canyon roared with fire and death. The warrior's figure vanished into the blaze, but his voice seemed to follow her through the wind. "Live," it whispered. "Live so they remember." She rode through the night, past scorched earth and shattered wagons, past rivers turned black from ash. When dawn finally broke, she saw the White Cliffs rising in the distance, glowing softly in the morning light. She stopped there, holding her child close. The baby stirred, tiny fingers curling around her thumb. For the first time in months, she felt something close to peace. The war hadn't ended, not truly, but she had carried something through it, proof that life could still begin, even when the world tried to destroy itself. She looked back one last time toward the distant canyon. Smoke still rose faintly from it, but the fire was dying. Somewhere out there, the land was remembering him, the man who had once begged for death, found purpose instead. She whispered softly to the child in her arms. "He was fireborn," she said. "And you were born of that same fire? Never forget." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of sage and smoke. The desert stretched endless before her, but for the first time, it didn't feel empty. It felt alive, waiting. She turned her horse south, toward whatever future might come. and rode on as the sun climbed higher, one pride and the quiet promise that even in the ashes, life would rise again.